something about the cost of goods and items, and we mentioned the fact that you could buy a suit of clothes at Richmond Brothers for $22.50, which was a vest and a coat and a pair of pants. You want an extra pair of pants, it was an additional $5, and it was good. It was good quality cloth. You could buy a pair of shoes at Tom McCann, or I could, for about $5. And the same was true with other clothes items. A sweater, you could get a good sweater for $5, and or a hat for probably $7.50. And but those are just typical examples. Now, you could also, at that time, after beer came back after 1933, a bottle of beer cost 10 cents. And or it could possibly be ale or porter or stout, which I like very much, or a shooper of beer. A great big 20-ounce glass or a shooper of beer was 10 cents. Now, these fellas in these beer gardens at that time were they had a way of being very liberal with food. They always had a great big pan of peanuts, probably near the bar there someplace, and you could buy a good supply of peanuts for probably about 5 cents. Now, these were great big jumbo peanuts, oversized. If these people would buy the gunny sack full, they'd heat those peanuts up a little bit. These were Redskins, and then they would put on a very liberal supply of salt. And of course, when you ate those peanuts, you want more beer to wash down the salt. And so they had you coming and going. But that was just a little bit about it. Now, when I went to Michigan State in the early days, you took a trolley. There was a trolley that ran between Lansing and East Lansing. There was an open area there that where farmers were actually still farming. And today, of course, you don't know where anything ends, but that was true. There were open farms in that area there between those two communities. Also, I want to remember something about Michigan State that I always thought was kind of amusing, was that at East Lansing at that time, just a small community, nothing there but the college and homes, there was one church, and that was called the People's Church. It had been built just a few years before 1930. It was a beautiful Gothic structure, and that was the only church in East Lansing. Kids who wanted to go to their own individual churches, you might say, like the Catholic or the Lutheran or the Baptist or the Episcopal church, you took the trolley and you went into Lansing proper. But this was an interdenominational. It's still there today. In fact, George and Martha Grambua are members of the People's Church in East Lansing even today. And it's a beautiful structure. Now, they had a custom there where once every year, usually the spring of the year, they would invite representatives from all the sororities and fraternities on campus to send a couple people, 2, 3, or 4, whatever they want to send, to this particular Sunday service. It was just for them. Well, I went on several occasions, but one occasion that I recall specifically was that we went to this service. And there was a regular minister, and then there was an elderly man who also had a chair on the podium, and he was asked to say the prayer at the beginning of the service. And then he said the prayer at the end of the service. And his name was, I thought, just Martin Luther. I thought, well, I suppose that's all I remembered of it. Now, this one occasion, when we were in there, and the minister was there, he had started out the service with a prayer, and then the minister took over. And when it got to the end of his sermon, then he called upon this minister there to say the closing prayer. Well, the old man got up there, and he was quite elderly. He was a white-haired gentleman, and he proceeded with the prayer. And we were standing, the whole congregation was standing, and he continued. And then maybe about every 30 seconds, he would kind of lift up his head, and then he would say, "O Lord, where art thou?" And then he would continue on for another. Well, this happened about 5 times, this "O Lord, where art thou?" And about the fifth or sixth time that it had occurred, the people were getting itchy. They were standing on their feet, just it was a little bit of torture. Well, maybe that's what he intended. But he lifted up his head and he said, "Oh Lord, we're out there." And some character in the back of the room said, "Here I am." Well, you can imagine the guffaw that took place. Even the minister had a great big smile on his face. But the sermon finally ended, and we found out afterwards that the old gentleman, the old minister, was deaf. And so he didn't hear the guffaw. And I mentioned this one of the times, last time I was down in Lansing, and it just so happened that a lady who lives right across the street from George and Martha was a native of East Lansing, and she was, I could tell, somewhat near my age. She was an MD, she was a regular doctor, and she was still practicing medicine in one of the medical facilities there in Lansing. But she came in to see George and Martha about something, and I was telling her. And she said, well, I was living there at that time, and I told her about this Martin Luther. And she said, "You mean Martin Luther Fox?" Oh, I said, that's the first time I'd ever heard that. I didn't know. I just thought, no. She said, his name was Martin Luther Fox. And she said, I heard that story. She said, it made the rounds there for years. But I thought it was kind of a amusing thing that happened at that time. Now, I might say also that another thing that occurred that I just happened to think about was that Ed Grambua, his wife, her maiden name was Jessie McGee, and she was from Lake City. Now, it just so happened that after Marion's father died back in 1922 or somewhere in there, that for a period of a year, Marion and her mother went to live with her sister-in-law, a Miss Jessie Doudna in Lake City. They lived there for a year until Marion's mother could make up her mind just as to what she was going to do. Here was a widow with one girl still in grade school, Marion, and Don, the son, was going to college. And she was a little bit into quandary as to what was going to happen. Well, what eventually happened was, of course, that she went back to Ludington and that was a beautiful home that they had there in Ludington, big home. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs and 2 down, and so she proceeded to room and board people, mostly girls, mostly school teachers from the Ludington area. And that's how she made a little living. And then she also clerked in one of the ladies' dress shops in Ludington. But to get back to Jessie McGee, who was Ed Grambua's wife, in the later on, when Jessie got together with Marion, they were comparing notes and about the Doudnas and the McGees and the Rosses, and they found out that they were distantly related. It just so happened that Jessie McGee's people was originally Jessie Ross. That was her dad's sister, and she'd gone to Lake City as a young girl, as a young teacher, to teach in the schools there, and that's where she met this Dr. Doudna. He was a native of Lake City, and they met and they got married. And so she offered to invited Marion and her mother to come and stay with them until Phoebe Ross could decide what she was going to do. But that's where they found out that the Doudnas and the McGees and possibly even the Rosses had common relatives way back. Now, Jessie was quite a genealogist. As Marion said, she had that stuff down pat, where Marion had never paid too much attention to it. But there was a relationship there that between those 2 families, or 3 families. That's strange how you hang around long enough and you'll find out that we're all relatives one way or another. Now, another thing that happened, which was interesting to some, especially if you've been in my home here in Rogers City, as I sit here and making this tape, I'm looking at the lamp, which is a Tiffany lamp hanging over the dining room table, which is in this room. Now, that lamp was out of the original Ross home on Robert Street in Ludington. Her father had bought that along about 1919 or 1920, and he had brought it from Saginaw. And they put it up in the dining room of their home there on Robert Street. Now, years later, when Phoebe Ross remarried Charlie Clausen, she sold that home, the old original home, and went to live with Charlie. Charlie had a home, a smaller home, which was what she wanted because that other home was a big place to maintain. And she sold, and that's where the lamp went with it. Now, for some reason or other, subsequent owners there didn't particularly care for the lamp, and so they just took it down and they put it in the loft of the barn, which was also a barn in those early days, and then it became a garage. And for some reason or other, one of Marion's friends, years later, went to see Marion's old home and knew the lady that lived there, and she asked her about that lamp. Whatever happened to the original lamp that hung over the dining room? She was well acquainted. This girl's name was, original name was Naney Ackerman, and she had married a man by the name of Plummer, and she now, even today, she still lives in San Antonio, Texas. And this lady said, why, that lamp? She said, that's in the loft of the garage. Well, she said, what are you going to do with it? Well, she said, I'm not going to do anything with it. She said, do you want it? She said, yes. So Naney, her Marion's good friend from kindergarten on, got the lamp. Well, we'd go down to Ludington quite frequently, even after Marion's mother died. And this one time we went to, this girl had come back to Ludington. She and her husband had come back to Ludington, and they had a home on the shore there. And when she walked in, here was this lamp hanging in this girl's dining room. Well, Marion almost went through the floor. But then Naney told her how she got it. And Marion just said, well, she said, I'll tell you. She said, I know that you got it and it's in good hands. But she said, if you ever decide that you wanted to get a different lamp for your dining room or anything other reason, she said, I'd love to have that lamp. Well, what happened was that within probably a year after that, this lady, Naney, and her husband decided to give up their home in Ludington, and they were going to go and live in Lexington, Virginia, where one of their daughters was living. And they were going to sell the home. And so she told Marion on the phone that if you want that lamp, you come and get it. She said, I'll give it to you. And so sure enough, we made arrangements. That weekend we were down there in Ludington. They had taken the lamp down, had put it into a box, big enough so that we could get it into our car. And we spent the weekend with them there, and then we came back, and within a week it was hanging in our new kitchen here in our home. It's hanging there today. A beautiful, beautiful Tiffany. And now, just for the record, that lamp is to go to John Ross Moffat in St. Clair. He knows about it. And but it would be nice to just keep it in the Ross family. And but that is the story that if it hadn't been for Naney Plummer, I suppose that nobody would ever know, because Marion often wondered what happened to that lamp. Now, it just so happened that in the intervening years, when we used to go back to Ludington, Marion did go over to find subsequent owners of that house. She took pictures of it. She went through the house with the permission, of course, of the new owners, and she mentioned to these people as to, well, they knew nothing about it. They didn't even know that had been the case. But of course, at that time, Marion just didn't even ask where it was. But this other Naney was inquisitive enough to say, well, now, where is that lamp? What do you know about that? And this lady said, well, she said, it's in the loft of the garage. She said, is that green lamp up there? And this girl said, yes. Well, that's where Naney found it, and she and her husband went and got it. But that's the story of the lamp. Now, Now, isn't it all right? I guess so. Now, well, I got a little time here yet on this reel. I'll talk a little bit, something about my remembrances of things while I was in high school. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I have to do that because I just I'm not thinking in terms of, I'd say, a sequence of things here. I say things, then I think back. Things go from 1915 to 1955 in my own mind. But now, as far as high school is concerned, for myself, the first 2 years were spent in the old, what we call the old red brick high school, about 2.5 stories high. The rest of you people, the rest of your brothers and sisters attended that school, and I think so did some of Grace's children. In my freshman, sophomore year were there, and at the end, right at the tail end of the sophomore years in the spring of 1928, we moved into the brand new high school, which had just been built, the one that is still standing there today. And now it is used, of course, again as an elementary school. We moved in around April, just before graduation. That's where my brother Herman graduated for the first class, 1928. It just happens they had 28 in that first class. Now, this building, of course, was located just, well, it hasn't moved. It's right there where it is today. Now, the old red brick building that was the high school before 1928. I moved into that in about the 5th grade from the old wood building, which was across the street, and where many of you kids attended. Now, when we moved into that building had been built about 1912, and it housed students from the grade 5 through 12. And there were classrooms on all floors. The basement, which was a kind of a half a basement, I mean, half of the room was above the ground, above the floor, above ground level. There were three large classrooms in the basement, besides the bathrooms and the boiler room. And on the first floor, what we call the first floor, were 4 large classrooms and a large corridor which also acted as a classroom for the Commerce Department. Then on the top floor, the 3rd floor, were 2 classrooms, the superintendent's office, a library, a large corridor, of course, for hanging clothes, and then a large assembly hall which handled all the kids from grades 7 through 12. Now, sometimes it was 8 through 12, but when I was there, it was 7 through 12. Everybody that was grade 7 through 12 met in that one big room probably about 40 by 50, or maybe a little bit more than that, and it housed, a good 150 kids probably, or 160 kids. And that was a common assembly for school purposes, and it was also a room where community met for many, many purposes. It was an assembly hall. And so when you were in high school, whether you were in grade 7 or 12, you had one common assembly, so you knew everybody that was in high school. Anywhere from grades, say 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 were all there, covering a 6-year period of age. Now, as a student in the high school, I took a regular academic program, as I had been told, or it was expected of me, that I was going to go on to school, going on to college. So I took the usual 4 years of English and 4 years of social studies and 2 years of science, chemistry, and physics, about 3.5 years of mathematics, and a couple of years of Latin, half a year of typing. Now, I recall that when we moved in the spring of 28 into the new high school, that was a beautiful, beautiful building, and it's still a beautiful building today. Now, today is April 29th, 1994, And this fall of '94, they're going to use more and more of that old building, which had been kind of half empty for a few years. The enrollment is going up. They need more room. So that old building, which is a beauty, is going to be put back to almost full use. And that's a smart move, as far as I'm concerned, for the Board of Education to do that. Now that building, of course, has always been, or has been, since the fall of spring of 1928, the headquarters for the administrative office, the headquarters for the superintendent's office, the headquarters for the Board of Education. And it still is today. The years that I spent there as superintendent, I spent in the same office area that my predecessor H.H. Gilpin spent. Most of you kids know where that area is. I think that the rest of the kids, that is, as far as George and Grace, Teresa, and Ernestine are concerned, they followed the same sequence as I did, my brother Herm before me, having spent some time in each one of three buildings as we went along. Well, we still do something similar to that today. Only thing is, the old sites, the old buildings are gone. The old wooden building, which was over there on the corner of Michigan and 5th Street, is completely gone, and a nice, beautiful apartment complex is on that site. Where the old red brick high school is, the one that you attended to probably as a grade in the grade schools, is now a playground for the elementary students who now attend the old high school. So everything is being utilized, and of course the new buildings are on top of what we call Heft Hill, as you probably all know. And now the grounds, as I say, of the old wooden building are the apartment complex, and the elementary playground is where the old red building stood that was built in 1920, that was built in 1914. It's interesting to note this fact, that when in 1912 or 13, when the old red brick building was built, when our dad, G.W. Grambua, was on the Board of Education, and that building was built for a contract price of $14,000. It's hard to imagine a structure with that much square footage being built for that cost. But then the new high school that I graduated from, and that the rest of you kids graduated from, was built for a cost of $200,000. Today, it's hard to imagine. And those were very well-built structures. That was a beautiful structure. The high school, especially, they said that the board kind of overspent itself. They made it a little bit too elegant. The materials that they used were a little bit too good. Well, I can tell you today, if you hadn't gone up, but that's also already 60 years ago. So I just thought I'd put that in there. I want to get into saying a few more things about our dad, George W. Grambua. Now, I realize this is something a little bit disjointed, but you'll have to forgive me, because I find this a very, very difficult thing to do in asking myself questions. It might sound easy to you, but try it sometime. I'm telling you, it is not the damnedest easiest thing in the world. It'd be much easier if one of you kids was here asking me these questions about what happened then, what happened now. But so I'll have to do it myself. Here we go. Now, approximately, I would say about 1910 or 11, our dad, G.W. Grambua, served as the village clerk of the village Rogers. I don't know how long, but I know that he did hold that office for a short period of time. He served on the Board of Education for approximately the period of 1910 to 1934. That was during the time that we were in school. It was during the time that I was in high school. And in fact, Dad's signature is on my diploma. Now, I don't know whether he's on yours or not, but he served a period of about 24 years. He was secretary. And he served during the period that they built the old red brick, and he also served on the period when they built the new high school, which you and I know about. Now, he, for a period of about 25 years, he also served as the Secretary-Treasurer of the American Red Cross. And he and Mother were members of the Spitzer Club at Lake Nettie, which was an outing and social organization at Lake Nettie for a period probably about 30 years. And I think for a period of about 25 years, he was the treasurer of St. John's Lutheran Church. He also, for a period of time, was an agent for the John Hancock Life Insurance Company. I know that he was a member of the Businessmen's Association here in Rogers City, which was the forerunner of the present Chamber of Commerce. Now, Dad, of course, having been a teacher, was always interested in education. And we could always depend that on Washington and Lincoln's birthday, Dad would come and visit the schools, visit his kids' classes in schools. The banks were closed, and that was his opportunity for all the years that I can remember and that the kids can remember, that he always came to visit the schools, talk to the teachers. And that was always a little bit different than most kids had the opportunity at. And I also remember that for many years, I don't know how long this went on, that at least once a year, maybe it was twice, that Mother and Dad entertained our teachers at a dinner at our home. Oh yeah, that was a big event. And I don't recall that I was maybe ever too enthused about that, but nevertheless, there was no place to hide, and you did have to learn a certain few niceties about being good to those people who entertained, I suppose, or who helped your children. Now, also, Mother and Dad, I know, belong to several organizations, especially Spitzer clubs. And there were several organizations. One of them that they belonged to had went on for many, many years, especially during the fall and winter season. A group of people, all friends and old neighbors, and would gather to play Spitzer on a Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening. And there was always a big meal, and I know at our place there was always a big affair. Now, some of the people that were in that organization, now you understand this alternated, were the Harry Cummins, there was Reverend Lynn and his wife, there was Bill Klaus and his wife, there was Fred Schminkel, there was Nick Jopic, there were the Burt Bertrams, and there were Bill Hellers, and there could have been another 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 other people that were in that group. And they played Spitzer, and they visited, and it was just strictly a social affair. And they played Spitzer, which of course is a local game, played very, very extensively in Presque Isle County. Their mother and dad, my mother and dad, were also very active in the first Parent-Teachers Association that was organized in the schools here, Rogers City. And Mother was very active in the Lutheran Ladies' Aid. In fact, she was a charter member of that group, the group that organized the Ladies' Aid of the St. John's Lutheran Church in 1917. And so those are things that I kind of like to remember. Now, I might say that Mother and Dad were very seldom, as I recall it, raised their voices at us kids. Well, stern, yes, stern, all right, but there was no shouting. And you have to remember that Dad's signal to keep quiet was his pointer finger up to his lips. This might have happened at the dinner table. You keep quiet. Those fingers went up to the lips. And you could tell that in his day he'd been a school teacher, because that's a very common sign of a teacher. If Mother did not talk to you, you know that you were on the outs. She did not even see you, you knew that you were on the outs. You were in the doghouse. Now, Mother did not lay a hand on the boys. That was Dad's territory. Now, I don't know whether Mother actually paddled Grace, Teresa, and Ernestine or not, but I think probably she laid out a few full hands across the butt to straighten the girls out a little bit at times. And I know that as far as the boys were concerned, Herm, Harry, and George, that the standard treatment for being out of line was a few whacks with a razor strap. Now, your razor strap is a leather thong that is used to sharpen straight razors. It's probably 18 to 20 inches long, and the razor is stropped over that thing to keep it sharp. But boy, does it produce a sting when it's laid across the butt of a young lad who has been out of line. He certainly learned, it was a straightener outer. It straightened a few things out with a razor strap. Now, another one of Dad's discipline, at the table, when we were all sitting around there as kids, and somebody would forget to say, please pass the potatoes, or pass the bread, or pass the butter, or pass the jelly. Some kid would reach out there with his hands going across the table, and all of a sudden, out would come Dad's hand with the flat of the dining room knife right across the knuckles, and bang! And oh man, did you learn how to say, please pass the butter and pass the plate, because that could really sting. Now, understand this was the flat of the knife. When Dad knew just how to do that, he would lay it on there, and boy, did you soon learn how to pass the butter. Now, there are other things that I remember. A few other things I remember, and that is one of them I like to kid my brother George about, was that when we were at around the table, there was Mother, Dad, Herm and I, George, and Grace. George was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And Dad would rotate the Grace. He would say Herman, Harry, Mother, and Dad, then they would say the Grace. But Dad evidently felt that George, being about 5, could also say the Grace. And so, at this time, he didn't say anything more. He just simply said, George, you say Grace. Well, unfortunately, George didn't know what that meant, because that is a word that he wasn't accustomed with. Well, so he didn't say anything, and then he said, George, say Grace. That happened about the second time. Third time, you could tell Dad was getting just a little bit flustered, so he said, George, say Grace. So George, not knowing what the heck was going to be the score, just simply said Grace. Well, Dad was going to say something to George, young George Jr., and Mother put her fingers up to her lips and said, keep quiet, keep quiet. And afterwards she explained to him why the poor kid didn't know what Grace meant. And I guess Dad had to admit, yeah, I guess that's probably right, the kid didn't know what Grace meant. But that was always a little story that traveled the circuit there for a while. Then another time when George was another one of George. And this was when George came home. He was probably, maybe 10 years old. And he came home and he told Mother that J. Hop was giving a big party, a dance at the school, that they had posters in all the windows of the school all over town. and the cost was $1.50. Wasn't that nice? J-Hop. Now, the thing is that there were a good number of hops in town. A good number of them. It would probably be enough to have a dance if all the hops showed up themselves. But J-Hop was giving the party.